We tend to think of the body as a meat wagon, a brain taxi, whereas actually the body is part of who we are.
So what habitually has men be so disembodied?
We are subject to these forces like industrialization, the technological age, which is so attention grabbing. It's hard to be in one's body when you're on TikTok.
We're disconnected to everything, and by that we're going to be disconnected to our bodies.
Right. So if we disconnect to our bodies, for example, we lose empathy, so it's hard to connect with others. Our bodies are our radar for meaning and purpose.
Why do you feel that men in particular have lost a meaning for life and living?
Well,
welcome back, listeners. Welcome back to another wonderful episode. And I love to say what we're going to talk about, but I'm never really sure. So we're going to talk about men, embodiment, and how men can thrive and men's struggles most likely. But beyond that, podcasts have their own life of them. And today I'm joined by a man who I've known and watched for many, many years. Actually, I was put onto his wonderful work in the embodiment space by a lady I was dating maybe 6 or 7 even years ago. And it's been beautiful to kind of watch him from afar. And friends of mine have done his programs and so forth, spoke very highly. I've seen his work really take off in popularity for very, very good reason. Today we have with us Mark Walsh. How are you doing, Mark?
End of the year, I've got that November feeling, December feeling where you're sort of out of fucks and just want to go hibernate for Christmas. So I've got a bit of that, but I am looking forward to talking. So I just want to be honest.
Yeah, I'm in the feeling now as I'm almost counting down the days until I don't really have to do any work again, which will come around next Wednesday. And then I'm pretty much off mainly for Christmas, and then I'm off on holiday. So I'm very much winding down.
We're cyclical creatures. Modernity has the lights on all the time, literally and figuratively, and everyone I know is pushing too hard for too long. And actually, we're cyclical creatures. And by the time it gets to, we're like 10 days away from the shortest day of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, there's that urge just to hibernate and to be less public facing. And actually, that can be quite a beautiful place in the sort of going deep and dark and in. There's something about that can be lovely as well. But it's hard to sort of get up and push yourself at that time. Yeah, I know a lot of my clients find that, but that's a good example of the fact that we are organic creatures and we're living in this very inorganic modern world. So that kind of dives us into the topic, really.
Yeah. There's this kind of like, I see some people talking and they're like, keep pushing to the end of the year, you got to keep pushing. And I'm of the phase of actually, I did a lovely event last night, which took a lot of energy. And now I'm just like, I feel like I'm on a sled, going down slowly down the snow until I land on the beach in Sri Lanka.
Oh, nice. Nice.
The
I'm going
28th.
to Italy. That sounds good. I often get away from the British. I was just in Austin, which was great. I had a bit of sun there, so I shouldn't complain. But yeah, so getting away from it a little bit and going into oneself. That's the rhythm of the end of the year. But as I said, I think it's a nice microcosm of this sort of inhumanity of modernity. My topic is the body, but it's nested within this bigger topic of where we are in history, where we are philosophically. That we're in a time of constant doing, we're in a time of inorganicness, of linearity, of pushing ourselves. And everyone I know is exhausted. Sometimes I say they're dead, which is distracted, exhausted, anxious, and depressed. And that seems to be the condition of the modern world. Not for every individual, but as a whole. Certainly since COVID, I've seen that en masse. And I've also seen the mental health of people, particularly men and young men. And there's stats on this, but I've seen the mental health of people really fall off a cliff as I think we've hit the limit of something that's been going on for a few hundred years, actually.
I was talking about this in a workshop I ran at a company a few months ago, and it's like, if you go back to when we were kind of peasant farmers, we worked like half the year. It was like 160 days that most people were working.
Well, there's this lie that the Enlightenment, which is a PR job in its naming, happened, and modernity was this sort of wonderful thing for everyone. But actually, urbanization, the average person's life got way worse. And without idealizing it, because I wouldn't have wanted medieval dentistry, but without idealizing it, the medieval period, people worked a lot less. But way more important than that is that, aside from being in touch with the seasons, maybe they worked like harvest time and stuff, but they also had a meaning in a way that I think we can't imagine. There was a nested sense of tribe and meaning in terms of what was meaningful in their life, the sacred, that we've lost in modernity and then in post-modernity. So since industrialization, the sort of, the information age, which is even incredibly confused. And some people would take it back further. They'd say, actually, it's the loss of the Paleolithic village that's been the real mental health challenge. But then we've got new challenges in modernity and industrialization, and then brand new challenges in terms of technology and post-modernity just in the last 5 to 10 years, really.
Yeah. And you talked about a loss of meaning. Why do you feel that men in particular have lost like a meaning for life and living?
Well, we're shat on from a great height. So ask most people what is positive masculinity, they won't have an answer. Now, it's not to say that, most men and women, most women like men, for example, they like their brothers and their fathers, people are reasonable that way. But society as a whole just paints a picture of men as either being weak and compliant or strong but brutal and mean. This is the standard Hollywood portrayal. It's either the idiotic Homer Simpson who's sort of bumbling fool. Every advert you ever see portrays men that way. Or it's the Hollywood sort of men are bad and girl power. So I think that's part of it. And we are, as humans, we need meaning. We need it more than anything. And everyone's lost that, men and women. But I think particularly men, like the traditional roles of protector, provider, are not so much there. Now, it's interesting. I saw some data the other day saying Ukraine has better mental health than the UK. Men in Ukraine have many problems. I run a charity in Ukraine that deals with trauma. But lack of meaning is not one of them. And when you hear women in Ukraine, like the team I manage are essentially Ukrainian female psychologists, and they say things regularly to me like, we love our men are heroic, our men are amazing. They've got something to die for. And what would the average East London hipster die for? I mean, other than to get a sort of, skinny oat milk, organic cappuccino, like what would we die for? And if we don't have something to die for, we don't have something to live for. And that's a problem.
Yeah, there's nothing that's deeply meaningful, that's really deeply meaningful in our hearts, because we feel like the world around us doesn't appreciate. And I think that's something I speak to a lot of men, that they feel like no one's appreciating them. No one appreciates the job that they do. And they're, like you said, they're painted as usually as just being bad and being predatory and all these things. And that there's a lack of nuance in the portrayal of men, particularly, some of my female listeners won't like this necessarily, but from the large kind of groups of women or the social media messaging from some women of just continually telling their female audiences how bad men are in multiple different facets and ways, without actually speaking of the other side of it, which is the average man who say, like, I always think of the guy who cleans the sewer, right? There's a guy out there or a team of guys who clean sewers, and we've never met a guy that cleans a sewer. And it's a disgusting job, right? It's a horrible job, but we all need that person. And there's nowhere really that's people championing like, thank you to the dude that cleans my sewer every year.
And that's 95% men who are cleaning the sewer, and no one's trying to get 50% women in that job. No. I flick the switch and the electricity comes from, there's some guy in a power station who's staying up late away from his kids doing that. Like, and there's not just that, but we're standing on the shoulders of our ancestors. My immigrant granddad who moved to the country and risked his life in World War II. Like, we're standing on those shoulders of men throughout history who've suffered and had a hard time. And it's like, yeah, women have had a hard time too, but let's not make it a competition. Men and women love each other, need each other. We're different and we're complementary. And if the fact that saying that makes you worry, like, oh my God, are we going to get cancelled for saying obvious things like that? It shows to me there is a massive conspiracy. It is ridiculous. And there's reasons for it. Like, part of it's economic. Like, absolutely, the economic system wants women in the workplace because that's twice as many people working. And of course, I want my niece to have that choice, but now she doesn't have a choice. My sister and brother-in-law have to have 2 incomes just to pay the rent. So there's an economic pressure towards that. Also, the state loves taking the role that men used to take of protection and provision. So that is a role that the state would love to take over in terms of that. There's historical factors. So there's, it's not just men aren't appreciated. There's more to it than that. And we can say more generally, men and women have a crisis of meaning, as say, for example, John Vervaeke, who's a cognitive scientist I follow, calls it. In that, materialism doesn't cut it. mean, consumer culture does not balance the horrors of just being human, right? Like my mum's starting to go senile. I saw her the other day. It's tough. And that's a normal human experience. For someone else, it's miscarriage. For someone else, it's divorce. You know, these are normal human things. And I've tried hedonism. I've tried it thoroughly. I've tried it in my nose. I've tried it through my dick. I've tried it through every pint of Stella in East Anglia. I've tried it in a million ways. And it doesn't work. It's not enough given how life is. So materialism, consumer culture doesn't give us what we need to flourish as humans.
Is it that consumerism is empty?
Of course. I mean, it doesn't satisfy the human soul. But nothing in modernity does. Like, look at the average building in London. What building in London that's been built in the last 50 years do you look at and that ennobles your soul in the same way as, I don't know, Ely Cathedral does, where I grew up? All right. Even the House of Parliament is a beautiful building. Right. What physical structures do you find ennobling? What music are you finding ennobling? When was the last time you watched a Hollywood film and thought, wow, this makes my soul sing? Like, we're just being fed trash. Like, the trash we're being fed in no way satisfies us. So everyone's going crazy.
And there's a loss of, you mentioned sacred before. It's like, before we had, some people still do have religion and faith and belief. And is that just being replaced by money as a thing that we worship?
Yeah, I mean, you have to worship something, right? There's always something that's at the top of your, top of the things you care about. As Bob Dylan said, you've got to serve somebody. And do you want it, like most people, a lot of kids, it's fame. That's the religion of America, I would say. It's fame and celebrity. And that spread, the Americanization has, ruined the world. So that's one kind of thing we serve. Another is just materialism. Another is hedonism. That might be Tinder swiping or drugs, right? They're things I've tried. Making those things your God, in my experience, doesn't end well. And I'm quite jealous of people that have a really strong traditional faith, like I have a Muslim cousin, or I've got a Orthodox Christian employee, for example, I was just speaking to. But that's very tricky. And, Nietzsche identified this a couple of hundred years ago. He said, God is dead and we have killed him. And that wasn't a celebration. That was him saying, oh, my God, what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now? Where do we get our values from? How do we make meaning in life? And that's a rough question in post-modernity. I mean, even like the fact that we're internationalists, right? I was just talking to someone German in Bali and I'm guessing we're both from immigrant families. It's not like we're all from one place with one faith and one tribe. We're all mixed up together. And that's kind of crazy making. London's completely crazy making for me. But anywhere in the West now is a mixed up bucket of people. And there's one, don't get me wrong, I love a curry. There's benefits to that, right? But the negative is we don't have a strong sense of tribe and place. It's not like a indigenous person who says, my ancestors have lived here for 10,000 years and every tree has a god and every rock has a story and every river I have a relationship with. We don't have that. And we've lost contact with the environment. We've lost contact with the tribe, the group. We don't have a shared set of values. Like you hear the government talk about British values. What are they? I'd like to know. Like what is it we could all sign up for? And then we've lost contact with our bodies, which has been my specialism. I've devoted my career particularly to that part of the equation. But we shouldn't. The reason we're disembodied is because we are in this kind of bigger framing. So that's worth setting up.
We're disconnected to everything. And by that, we're going to be disconnected to our bodies.
Right. So if we disconnect to our bodies, for example, we lose empathy. So it's hard to connect with others. Our bodies are our radar for meaning and purpose. I coach a lot of people on that. So if we're not noticing what lights us up, if we're numb or distracted or agitated, we're going to miss that signal. When people talk about like the conscience on the shoulder, that's embodied. It's not in your head. I mean, if you get it as a voice in your head, well, you're either schizophrenic or very lucky, right? Don't do that, Mark. But usually it's a feeling. It's like a yuck or a lighting up feeling of, oh, wow, this is the girl for me. I'm really comfortable with this girl, like really deeply. Or, wow, this is the career for me. I've got energy. I want to get up at 7 a.m. and do this. That's all embodied. That's not cognitive.
And how would you, before we, people always love definitions, how do you describe being embodied or embodiment?
With a kiss, with dancing like a dad at a disco, by starting a fight. They're the best ways, okay? If you can't do one of those 3 ways, we could do it intellectually. I get asked that every podcast. So it's the subjective study of the body. So it's the body. We tend to think of the body as a meat wagon, a brain taxi, all right? That's the normal disembodied view of the body, the materialist view of the body. Whereas actually the body is part of who we are. This is common sense. If I touch you on your arm, I don't just touch your arm, I touch you, right? As Heidegger says, we are bodily. We don't have bodies, bodies have us. We are bodily. And this is actually, that's the sort of philosophical, sounds complex, subjective view of the body. But actually it's very common sense. Like when someone's walking down the street, you get a sense of who they are as a person. When you dance with a girl, you get a different sense of her than when you talk to her. When kids play, they do it through the body. You know, a dog will look at you and know if he's dominant or you're dominant. So, you know, this is basic stuff. Like a kid and a dog can work it out. We've just forgotten it because we're so in our heads. And we can say we're unconsciously embodying something. Like the London embodiment is different than the Brighton embodiment. As soon as you get off the train in Brighton, you feel, oh, wow, people are more loose, more playful. There's a different vibe here. It's not like Monday morning in London, you know? And the London embodiment's different than the New York embodiment, for example, the Moscow embodiment. So it's partly cultural, it's partly place, the environment we're in. I'm in the West Country where it's a slightly different vibe than when I used to live in Brighton, for example. Walks all over the world, so I'm obsessed with cultural embodiment, and that's part of it. But then, you know, we also have character. Different people embody different things. Some of that might be like masculine, feminine, different gendered stuff. Some of it's just personality. I've got a certain personality, probably different than yours, David. And we have states and traits. So as well as our traits as personalities, which we may or may not be aware of, right? That could be unconsciously embodied. We also have traits. So, you know, people do the breath work or the yoga, they change their states. And we have various embodied practices like martial arts and body therapy, trauma work. So you could also think of embodiment as a collection of these different arts, if you will, that build certain skill sets like bodily self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, and leadership. So a lot of information there. If listeners are really interested, I'd say pause, play back the last 5 minutes, listen to that again, you know, or just buy one of my books, and then we can talk about other stuff.
And I guess the question that sprung to me from there's a lot of questions, but the one that kept kind of coming back to my mind is if we're kind of habitually disembodied, and we might have touched on some of this already, but like I feel from my own experience of living, women are a little bit better at being embodied, right?
Well, traditionally, the body was a female domain. So that anything bodily, and some people say it's because women have periods and childbirth, and you know I'm old school, I still believe that, and you know that around may make women more in their bodies. The fact that women are maybe less emotionally repressed than certainly the average British man, though partly cultural. Yeah, it may be that women are a bit better than that, though. In my experience, the average London female lawyer is still living from the neck up. Like if I look on the tube, I don't see embodied people, male or female.
So why habitually has men be disembodied or so disembodied?
Yeah, I mean, who knows throughout history? I think we are subject to these forces like industrialization, which sees us, encourages us to see ourselves as machines. The technological age, which is so attention grabbing, it's hard to be in one's body when you're on TikTok, you know? So I think that applies to men and women. I think there's an extra pressure on men, which is we're disposable bodies. So it's women and children first into the lifeboats. It's, you know, if people talk about the patriarchy, I'm like, okay, give me the numbers on how many women died in World War I compared to how many men. It's a 95 to 5% ratio at best, you know? So we have been seen as disposable meat, cannon fodder. You know, that view still exists on the Russian front in Ukraine, for example, that men are just disposable meat. So I think that's an extra factor that maybe women don't have. And women are, I think, rightly seen as precious sources of life and bearers of children. And we rightly see that as precious. So that can give them a little bit more, people have a little bit more incentive to look after women.
And would you add in that other part, the men being disposable, but also men being trained to kill? This is something that I've often thought about when we think of war. We think of the disposability of men, but we also that as a man, you have to be trained to not just kill some other nameless foe that have been dehumanized, but also you have to be able to function in that and observe people that you care about dying and still continue in the warring, the war machine.
Yeah, machine's a key word there. So this is complex in that we don't have to be trained to kill. We are killers. I mean, men are pack predators. The male face is designed to be punched. That's literally how your face develops in puberty, while we have different bone structure to women in our faces. So we are predatory pack animals. Make no mistake. Now, we've been over-civilized to the point where we pretend we're not. We pretend we're good boys and would never think about that. So my training has been in not killing people. I think that's there's some truth in that. However, a sort of complementary truth is that modern warfare is an industrial process where people are dehumanized. And part of that dehumanization is in learning to brutalize and kill. I think mostly sort of male violence, if you look at it kind of tribally, is we're killers, but it's mostly around status and different things. And the sort of mechanized murder machine of modern warfare, which I have been around, I've worked in 6 different war zones, is horrendous. And that is certainly numbing. One way of looking at trauma is that it's the body numbing itself in response to overwhelm and powerlessness. And certainly if you're sitting in a trench getting bombed, that's understandable.
And then how does that then map to the kind of modern man who has never been near a war, right? Most men have never been near a war, but yet they're still experiencing this numbness, this disembodied nature of moving through the world, of just being in their minds and thinking and disconnected from empathy, disconnected from other people.
Yeah, so trauma can come from different sources, but it's not the only source of disembodiment. I'd say we're over-civilized in the modern world. It's actually not being around life or death. We're not in contact with life. If you look at it, nobody's breeding in the UK. We're so cut off from life that we're not even at replacement birth rates. It's like we're like pandas in a zoo that won't fuck to save their species. It's we're Ted Kaczynski, who was also known as the Unabomber, wrote a whole paper on this about how we're over-civilized, right? We're over-socialized, I think is the term he took from psychology. So I think that's another side of it. Do you feel enlivened and inspired and fully in your body and, your heart and your balls by modern life? I don't think most men do. There's all sorts of reasons for that. Disconnection from nature. I used to spend, when I was young, I used to work on farms and I used to spend all day outdoors, and you can't help but feel your body when you're doing manual labor in the cold with the wind and rain and occasionally the sun on your face. That's, in Britain occasionally. Like, you can't help but be in your body, right, if you're outside. I don't think my granddad, who was, a fisherman in the Irish Sea before World War II, I don't think he had that problem, So that's partly we're in these nice conditions. But there's also just biochemical factors like men's testosterone is a quarter of what it used to be, right? So we are just less virile in that sense. That's measurable. That's been measured. I think it's 25% less than it was even 20 years ago. So it's we are being biochemically poisoned is another factor.
It's a big decline there. And then, like you said, we're overly civilized. Modern life is really gearing us towards, and I see this as like modern life is gearing us towards thinking and problem solving and being part of even a corporate machine. I worked in the tech world for 16 years, and the whole thing there is to put aside feeling, because everything's a thinking problem. And one of my theories also is that when you become a corporate being, because of decisions that companies want you to make, they don't want you to feel the impact of making 20 people redundant. No. Right? They just want you to make the people redundant and act as if it is this cold, calculated numbers game. And if we're allowed to feel more, be more embodied, a lot of men would be just like, hey, I'm not doing that. We don't need to do that.
It doesn't feel right. I don't want to sell arsenic to kids as the new marketing campaign. Corporations are psychopathic. They are literally psychopathic by law. If a corporation makes a decision that isn't purely for shareholder value, it's breaking the law. They are amoral, legally enforced. So even if there's good people within them trying to make moral decisions, they are amoral by law. So yes, we live in a psychopathic structure, and the average corporate drone is subhuman. And I'm using provocative language here, but it's like, you're not alive, you're not awake. And we get that, and it comes out sideways, like guys getting really drunk at the weekend when they go out to football and shouting and screaming and acting like little boys, you know, because there's something in them that wants to come out if it's not coming out in a positive way. So, yeah, I mean, corporate subhumanity is the norm.
Yeah. And then I'm thinking of there's like a different band, like there was this much talked about now, and I've seen you speak about it as well, is the kind of the young man who's not really engaging in, as you talked about, like not really engaging in life, that's kind of being sidetracked, that's not engaging in work, that's not engaging in relationships, that's not engaging in sex. There's this ever-growing percentage of young men in the UK and the US that are like just almost... you know, the word incel's thrown around quite a lot, which I find...
They're opting out. An incel's an unkind term. It just means a guy who can't get laid, right? I mean, we wouldn't call a woman who, you know, can't find a partner an insulting term. So it's part of how we insult men, and it's normal to insult men. You know, I've heard women say, oh, men are trash. And I just think, God, it's just, how has that become normal to say things like that? And we need to challenge that. You know, if I have a guest on my podcast who says, oh, this is the patriarchy or men are trash, I just immediately mute them and be like, stop talking shit. Not acceptable. But I think there are guys who are just opting out. I think this first became apparent in Japan, and it spread to other countries. But actually, it makes sense why. They're not being around masculine role models, right? There's a lot of fatherlessness. There's not many, you know, guys in schools, for example. So they don't know how to mature and be a man. Economically, they're screwed over. I mean, it's just tough times economically for a lot of young people right now. My parents bought a house with 10 grand and a packet of crisps, you know, like, it's like, I haven't bought a house yet, I'm 45 and I'm in the top 10% tax bracket. It's like, what the fuck? So part of it's economic. Dating wise, the technology has taken away a lot of the skills to talk to girls. Secondly, if they talk to young women, they're going to get cancelled, so they're worried to do that anyway. And thirdly, the apps have completely destroyed the dating market for them. So most guys can't even get a match, let alone, you know, an unhealthy disembodying hookup, you know, let alone an actual proper girlfriend. So why would they leave the house? And they've got these great computer games they can play and all the world's best entertainment on hand. So they're super addicted to that. You know, their physiology's shot because they're not exercising or working out. So yeah, I can understand why they would give up in that situation. I have empathy for that.
And do you think that they believe that is the state of play for them? That's because I, you know, as a coach, I work a lot with like how we view the world is how we then experience the world.
Yeah. Okay, there's definite truth in that, right? Like our thinking perspective really matters, but the price of houses is still what it is, right? The dating market is still what it is. So without kind of going into victim mode too much, because, you know, I know from coaching people that's not helpful, though the culture is a victim culture right now. We've made victimhood sacred. That's the religion of post-modernity is victimhood. But let's say we can get past that as their religion and we coach them out of it. Yeah, I mean, some of it's self-fulfilling, but I think most of it's just the conditions they're in. I think starting with the body is a really good start. Most of what's called mental health is actually physical health. You know, mental health amongst young people is huge, but I'd say get a good night's sleep, exercise regularly, get outside in nature, and don't eat shit. 4 things. Okay, if anyone with mental health problems who's, you know, not in bereavement or something, right? Just anyone who's just, you know, normally anxious, depressed kid, do those 4 things, 90% of their people with mental health problems will no longer have mental health problems. So effectively, it's a physical health problem, and it's just expressing as a mental health problem. You know, I take a young guy to the gym and start working out with him. He's not depressed while he's in there. I mean, you try and be depressed while you're doing an overhead press. You lift 100 kilograms above your head, you're not depressed. So it's just physiologically incompatible. I mean, that's what embodiment coaching is, right? You're helping the mind through the physiology. And you don't have to do that in the gym, you know, but with young guys, the gym's a pretty good place to play because the gym's actually pretty popular amongst young guys. So, yeah, I feel like, you know, I've started doing a bit of coaching in the gym with young guys as well as my sort of more traditional embodiment coaching now.
That's like did that feel like quite a shift from being in, you know, the classroom, the embodiment? It feels all like super like trauma informed and quite soft, and you go into this gym where there's, you know, my first experience of gym in life was like a real meathead place where there was like metal clanging against the floor constantly.
Love it. Look at your energy in your body as you're saying that. I can see even just that memory is like livening you up. For me, I first discovered Asian practices like Aikido and meditation and yoga, and they were very good for me to build some discipline and self-awareness and self-regulation. Those Asian practices were great for me. They, helped me get sober. They helped me get myself together. As an ADHD bunny, they were super useful for me. So I love the Asian arts. And then I found other sort of more wild ones, the conscious dance, the things like that, a bit more expressive than the Asian arts maybe, and the trauma work, which is very Western. So this stuff comes from all over the world. There's lots of traditions. But then eventually I just wanted something, years and years and years of doing like complex, emotionally intelligent arts. I just wanted something fucking simple. Because running a company, dealing with trauma, dealing with, people's emotional issues all day long, I'm just like heavy thing up and down, gets me in my body. I loved how it made me feel. There's a masculine quality to it. Being strong is masculine. It is that simple. Don't overcomplicate it. And I love the feeling it gave me. And after a few years of doing it myself, what happened was various sort of single mum friends and lesbian friends were like, oh, can you take my boy to the gym? Because smart women, dumb women, think they can raise boys. That's fucking dumb. They can't. They absolutely can't. Okay, no matter with the best intentions, smart women know that boys need men. There's things they can't give them. And so female friends would be like, hey, can you take my teenager to the gym? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? And then I would, obviously I'd mentor them a bit and coach them a bit in the gym. But embodied coaching can be pretty non-athletic. It's just a bit easier actually in the gym, but it is a different culture, as you say. It's a much more sort of masculine, physical kind of culture. But naturally stuff opens up. You can be doing a bench press and talking about boundaries and what you want to push out of your life. Naturally things open up with the different movements. And if nothing else, it takes people out of victim mode pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And it also shifts, because I remember as a young man, I first went to the gym when I was about 17. And off the back of a breakup, that's what actually started. A friend of mine dragged me there because I was feeling really low and depressed. Yeah. And what I think the gym taught me was a couple of things. Is like that I can actively create growth in my life, and shift and change things, because you're sculpting your body to some degree, and also the power of
agency, right? You're seeing I've had an impact on my own body through my own hard work. Sorry to interrupt, but I can underline that.
And then there's this like piece around, because, you start going to the gym, you get some gains quite quickly. There's a 2-3 month period where you're like, oh, wow, I can really see that. And then there's a kind of arc of 6 to 12 months where it really slows down, and that continues for the rest of your gym time, in my experience, where it becomes very slow and you don't really see it, you don't notice, but it's a kind of a practice, isn't it? You stay in the practice because you know that it feels good, even though you're not seeing the immediate results. So it kind of trains this kind of delayed gratification as well, and the discipline of doing something over a long period that's hard, that's painful, and that there'll always be dips in. And I think this is something that I see with younger men or men in general, is the how they deal with failure, or the perception of failure. And with the gym, it's like you're always failing, you're always pushing to failure, or often pushing to failure. And you're often meeting what you think is a boundary or maybe your limit, and you're spurring yourself mentally to push past that limit.
Yes. So the Greek gymnasia was a place of holistic development, emotional, physical, philosophical, psychological, not just physical. And even though we haven't got that idea so much in the West, that idea is, by the way, to a Japanese would be totally commonsensical, that a dojo, an Aikido or karate dojo is where you do that, it's character development. That was all the original sports, which obviously were all British. If any American listeners are listening, they're all invented in the UK. Those sports were all done as character development. And that was the original idea. And that's got lost slightly, but it always comes out again. And you hear, like, I trained a bunch of PTs in Holland last week, and it wasn't hard to teach them this stuff, because they're like, oh yeah, I see clients get confidence. And you can think of it as skill acquisition. Like, what is discipline? It's the ability to do something hard when you don't feel like it. I went to the gym at 7:30 this morning and it was dark. And it's like winter, I don't feel like it. My Italian girlfriend's having a coffee on the couch. She said, I'll see you there in a bit, And I'm like, right, this is what we do. We go to the gym, and I've got to get it in before work, And then when I'm there, I'm dealing with difficulty. I'm dealing with frustration. I'm working with failure, all those things you say. There's a set of skills we build in the gym. And that's way more interesting to me than biceps. I mean, my pecs are coming along, but frankly, my titties are almost as big as my girlfriend's at this point. I mean, how big do they need to be? Do you know what I mean? So I'm like, all right, what's the point in having big pecs? But there's a lot of point in working through my emotions. Maybe for you, when you broke up with that girl, you had some frustration, you had some sadness, you had to find your agency and your power again. That's a beautiful thing, and it's so practical. And for some people, that's martial arts. For some people, that's the gym. I think there's, as an embodiment coach, I often help people find a practice that suits them. And, for me at the moment, the gym's great. Also, just practically, I travel a lot. It's hard to find a good dojo, but it's real easy to find a gym. It's open 24/7, whatever. There's practicalities, financial stuff. And I always say to people, like, if you want to get in your body, first thing is just fall in love with any embodied practice. For me, originally it was Aikido, later Tango, later other things, and Jiu-Jitsu, but then, now it's weights. So it's like, you know what? If you find something that gets you in your body that you love, do that, do that. That is brilliant. So that's why I just encourage everyone listening to this is you get out in nature. Great. That's also, get in the parks if you're in the cities every day. That's helpful. But the main one is just move in any way that you get in your body and that you enjoy.
And I think there's two thoughts I have currently that are spurred off. It's like when we talk about men, because there's this embodiment piece. And then I often see it as there's like a relational embodiment as well, right? Because when you're in the gym, you're with your weights, and they're kind of inanimate. They're not going to talk to you. But one of the other things that we're seeing with men is this big issue around loneliness. And you mentioned it before around embodiment and being able to feel, and there's being able to feel if someone is a good person or their character by being with them. And I see this as a real skill set that men often lack in, like this real, we've talked about some of that, why that the gym isn't necessarily going to give a man that piece of skill set.
So there's different embodiment skill sets. I break it down in, courses and books and stuff, right? It takes a while. So the gym might be good for self-awareness, for self-regulation, maybe self-expression if you give it a bit of a shout and a scream while you're doing it. But, maybe not as well as dancing, for example. Like, I lived in Brazil above a nightclub. I learned a whole different embodiment culturally there. I took the British stick out of my ass and learned to dance, I'm like Irish, British, white guy who couldn't dance. But after 6 months living in the favela, I could move, I had to have that immersion to learn that. For other people, the relational practices. So I met the founder of Acro Yoga recently in Austin, Jason Neiman, a nice guy. And that's a relational practice. And it's all about trust and safety and connection. Beautiful practice. Tango, Aikido, these relational practices that are going to teach you things. And this is like level 2. So if level 1 is, I'm in my head, I'm a accountant in London, I just want to get my body, do fucking anything. Level 2 though is like, all right, I've been doing yoga or maybe kickboxing or whatever for a while. What am I missing? So now we can build some range, right? So some of your listeners just do anything, but some of your listeners are already sophisticated. They're already doing, they've got embodiment training. But the problem is we tend to just deepen our neurosis. I was at a yoga club in London once, a yoga studio, one of the big ones. And I went to rocket yoga followed by yin yoga. So rocket's like your hardcore yang, pushing yoga, yin, super chill. And the exact wrong people were going to those classes. Rocket yoga was all like your type A city boys. And yin was all these like this really chill hippie girls. And I was like, you guys are all in the wrong fucking class. Like you're just becoming more neurotically you instead of building your range. And yes, sometimes we should just do what's fun. We all love the smell of our own shit, right? But it's also like sometimes let's stretch ourselves, like some of the, I've got friends who do circling, like these beautiful relational practices. For me, it's like pulling teeth, but it's super useful for me. Or improv comedy. Like I've got friends that take live, well, I don't need to do improv. My whole family are comedians. We don't have a problem with that. But some people, they need to find I've got German students who are really stiff and they just need to find the, it's like, come on, mate, loosen up. Improv would do them a world of good. Whereas others who, there's just guys who are a bit wet, they're in Shadwell, Shoreditch, and they need to go to kickboxing. They need to be kicked in the head a few times. It's different things for different people.
Yeah.
If you're wearing a beanie, you need it kicked off. That's what you should take away from that. That's the main thing you can take away from that rant.
And it's funny you talk about the yoga because for many years I wouldn't touch yoga, especially in my gym days. I wouldn't touch it. I was like, yoga. I remember openly saying, like, yoga's just stretching. It's pointless. There's no point doing that. Like, yoga's for girls. I'm not doing yoga. And I went to a friend of mine took me, and this is after I went traveling for a couple of years and my mind opened up a bit more. And I came back and I did a Jiva Mukti yoga class with a couple, Chris and Kiko. I never forget them because I went to that class religiously for a year and a half. And it was it was an hour and a half class and we'd literally walk out.
Love yoga, it's tough yoga.
Dripping wasn't the word, like your whole clothes would be saturated with sweat. And what you talk about range really kind of like physically felt it, like, oh, there's this whole range of like not just pushing heavy weights, but holding yourself in a position that's mildly uncomfortable and trying to stay somewhat relaxed and be able to keep your attention on your breath.
That's a skill, right? And that's a very useful skill to be able to relax. You know, today I had some difficult staff meetings. It's the end of the year. Everyone's a bit tired. We had a bit of grumpiness. I mean, you know, it's like, okay, can I stay relaxed in this difficult meeting? That's the transferable life skill. And you're not going to get it from a book. You're not going to get it from chat fucking GPT. You know, it's something you have to train because the West is confused as to what knowledge is. We think that knowing about things is the same as knowing something. Right? It's like someone said, I've read a lot of books on kissing. That's not the same as being able to kiss. You know, it's not the same as having lovers from different countries throughout your life. And, you know, it's not the same at all. Let's go live in Brazil. It's different. So that is what we've confused knowledge for, this book knowledge, this knowing about things. And that's where embodiment's needed. It's not the only thing, but it's needed.
It's an experiential practice of feeling what it feels like, you know, because when you talked about the yoga, it's something that I started to really practice because my thing was I avoid conflict. That's my habit in relationship, and learning to stay in conflict, stay present and breathe so I can still be like, actually, I have a functional mind in those moments. And I really can trace it back to two things that I started to do. I started to do a lot more breath work in the mornings, especially like breath holds. And I trace it back to doing yoga because I was used to being able to like, I'm in pain, emotional or physical, but I can stay here and still listen to the instructions from the teacher or stay in this breath hold, even past what I feel is my capacity, you know? That like belief and pushing past.
You only have one system for stress, that's the body, and one system for dealing with stress, that's also the body. So, you know, learning about stress, to be aware of the stress, not just theoretically, not just knowing the neuroscience, and then learning the skill, which takes practice of overcoming that. And, you know, there's different pieces to that, right? We could look at our baseline life stress, our trauma, and work with that. But there's also a skill set that you were able to transfer, which is, you know, a great example of embodied learning. And I give my, you know, coaching clients quite little practices, little short things. You know, they can take away one yoga pose for work on something, or cold shower once a day, or breath hold once a day, like little practices they can take away to learn those skills.
You mentioned strength earlier. I wrote it down and I got a little box around it. And I saw one of your Instagram reels and you were talking about strength and traditional masculinity and how like traditional masculinity has this idea of what strength looks like and it just being purely physical. And you talked about that we need to extend that. And I guess it ties into what we're talking about range, have more range of what strength is for the modern man. I'd love you to like open that up a little bit more.
Yeah, so in terms of what is masculinity, everyone's got a different theory. I first of all think you should ask men, not women, for starters. You know, I wouldn't be so arrogant to say this is what it is to be a woman. But one of the classic definitions is about strength. Now, rather than try and go against that and say, we should all be like super vulnerable, super, you know, weak, and rather than making that pathological, instead, I think it's much healthier to extend the definition of strength. To say, okay, yes, be physically strong. That is a good base. A weak man is a useless man, and that is both unethical, unattractive, and, you know, not something to be cultivated. So weakness is not a virtue. Strength, though, can be extended from the physical into the emotional, the psychological. You know, if you're in the gym every day but you don't read any books, I'd say you're probably missing something. If you're in the gym every day but you don't have emotional strength, I don't know, maybe you're an addict and you haven't worked on your sobriety, for example, I'd say that's a problem. So not going against strength or any of the traditional masculine virtues, which are well-defined and cross-cultural before anyone tries to get clever about it, but actually extending those virtues into a more modern sphere, like strength at every chakra if we want to get yogic about it.
Strength at every chakra. Oh, yeah, it's a strength of the heart, strength of the willpower, strength of like speaking one's truth, and
absolutely, authenticity, concentration. These are all skills we can develop that are really about strength, right? Strength of concentration, strength of courage to speak one's mind. These are the things that are lacking, and I think we're laughably weak as a culture, and that's not to be encouraged.
And is that because you feel that we have put our attention on building a different skill set of strength and maybe over focusing on that, like mental strength, for instance, and not necessarily mental in knowledge strength, as you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly that we're a hyper-cognitive culture that focuses on that, and that sends us all a bit crazy, frankly. We spin off into the cognitive. But if I put my sort of Marxist hat on, I'd also say that a weak population is a compliant, easily manipulated population. I think that any power that exists certainly doesn't want a strong population. That's the lie. There was a reason Greek slaves weren't allowed to go to the gym. Right. So with being a little bit more conspiratorial there, I'd add that in. But what you said isn't wrong as well.
Oh, yeah. And I guess if you have to add into that, if you have a population who are chowing on, short 20-second clips of bright colors and like empty content, instead of reading books about philosophy and history and things like that, their minds are much more...
Their minds are weak.
Their minds are empty.
Yeah, I mean, we are encouraged to be addicted to the next dopamine hit, right? We are our attention is being destroyed and farmed for profit in a way that's not in our interests. And I think, you see those pictures of like kids in Victorian times smoking cigarettes. I think that's how in the future we'll look back on kids with mobile phones and we'll be like face palming, like, oh my God, I can't believe that, kids used to do that. I think, and this is not neutral, the attention is more than people think. Attention, I say this as an ADHD squirrel. Everyone's ADHD now. Like, my ADHD just seems normal now. Like I find it hard to read a book sometimes, I try and do audiobooks instead, or I download things off YouTube on my download list that have real substance. I'm working my way through 50 videos of this philosopher right now. And, I've got a group, we meet every Sunday to go through those videos together. So there's some accountability to hold us on track, because otherwise the attention's shot, and attention is the gateway to the divine. It's not just like paying attention in school or something. It's way more important than that. And it's just pragmatically also necessary for anything that really matters in life.
I love what you said there. Attention is a gateway to the divine, because that is the Eastern practices. That's what they're mostly about, like training attention.
Absolutely. And I struggled to sit still when I started, with my ADHD, but then through yoga, through martial arts, I managed to calm down a bit. And now I can sit still reasonably well. I can focus reasonably well. Like, we're all starting from different places, but the average person now is distracted and addicted, and their mind is broken. Our mental health is destroyed by this technology for someone else's profit. So this is to be examined. If you want a healthy, meaningful life, this is to be examined.
Yeah, I think of... there's some research that's come out that we've just had a little boy, he's 6 months old. And before he was born, my partner, she showed me some research that come out to show that like kids under 2 shouldn't see any screens. 0, no screen time at all, right? And that the research shows that it really impacts their brain development in many ways. And I was on Instagram, which is ironic as I'm saying this, and a woman had posted about this research. A mother, and it must have gone quite big because he doesn't have a huge account, but there was like hundreds and hundreds of comments, and they were just mothers after mothers complaining about the fact, like, what am I going to do? And I never forget a few of the comments I read. It was like, what am I going to do with my 6-month-old if I can't put him in front of the TV so I can do things around the house?
Yep.
And I remember thinking, I probably grew up watching TV. It probably was a black and white TV, to be honest. Sure. I've got this little picture of me.
And also the programs are very different. The level of stimulation, if you watch a modern cartoon, it's a total head fuck. It's totally different. Yeah. Like you watch the old school anime or old cartoon, it's super chill compared to what you watch. I mean, I understand, a busy, tired mother, I understand that. I've seen my sister do that, I get it. So I don't want to judge anyone there. But, on the other hand, I know a mother in Slovenia where everyone's nervous system is calmer because people are spending a lot more time in nature. It's a lot more sane as a culture than, say, UK or Holland. And she's always doing acro yoga with her kid. That's what she does. And that kid has got the best It's a 3-year-old and it's got the most calm, well-regulated nervous system I've ever seen. And that kid is way easier to deal with than any English kid I've seen, because so she's invested that time and attention and connection, but again, if the family split, if women have to be in the workplace and babies are raised by strangers in groups, that's not going to be the same, is it? So this is a luxury to have one parent who can really give the kids that much attention without having to work. It's also, what do we model? Personally, I came off some of the socials. My company runs my Instagram, and I just make the reels and don't look at them once I've done them, because I've just found it's better for my mental health. And I re-downloaded Facebook after 6 months off the other day, because there's a group I need to look at about moving somewhere. There's a discussion about Irish passports, and I went on that group, and I just had the sense that it was this like a nervous system toxin I was ingesting. And it's not just that it destroys the attention, but it brings out the worst in people. I'm a less nice guy on social media than I am in real life. And I think it brings out unethical behavior. And what I also see is, like you have a podcast I've done for a while, and I've noticed an increase of sort of narcissistic influencer guests in the last couple of years. So not all guests, we have some great guests on, but if I have one that's got a big Instagram following, they're quite young, they're really into the socials, and my sense is it's actually feeding their narcissism. And that's profoundly unhealthy, because we are in a narcissistic culture more generally anyway, so we don't need that.
Yeah, we're also obsessed with how we appear to be, less so how we really are.
How do we develop virtue as opposed to just appearing virtuous? Like, that's a more interesting question. That's not a question most people in post-modernity have an answer to, right? How do we, rather than signal virtue through using some special language, words that someone's policing, how do we actually develop character? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. And I imagine, I've had this experience, and I imagine you have it on a larger scale. It's like, I've coached people who have large Instagram followings. I've coached relationship coaches who have large Instagram followings, and I've seen the chaos of the inner life. They're in a relationship, or they're in the stuff. There's the way they portray themselves in public of being this very on high person. And then there's what actually the abuse, should we say, whether that's self-abuse or and I'm a bit pushing that a bit far, within their relationships, because it's how they look has become far more important to them because of the finances of it than actually who they're being on a day-to-day basis in their life.
100%.
There was one more thing that's popped into my mind. Risk and rejection. This is something I see in a lot of young men. I'm fascinated by your opinion on this, because I see that risk and rejection are like a vital part of life. And the men that we talked about, the lonely young men sitting at home playing PlayStation and Call of Duty and so forth, one of the big problems I see, especially in kind of the dating phase, is there's an avoidance of risk and rejection. Yep. They're avoiding it because it triggers some level of emotional pain.
Sure, it sucks. Yep. So what's going on? Okay, so what's going on? First of all, there's an embodied skill of attunement and body reading that you only learn in person. I remember being a teenager and going across the school to the school disco and asking a girl to dance, and it being terrifying. I can remember that room. I remember it. It was terrifying. But that was the only way to get a girl. There was no texting. There was no Tinder. I was like, I've got to walk across that room, So that is a skill that you learn through practice. And it sucks, man. Being a teenager is not easy. So they're getting less of that practice because of all the online communication. The other thing is the cost-benefit analysis has changed. If being male is toxic and, asking a girl out is harassment, then, you can get cancelled or you get in trouble at school just for asking, then you're not going to ask, are you? Like, kids have got to be able to be clumsy and make mistakes. And this is in terms of rejection, you realize as well that is a skill. Like, years ago now, I approached 1,000 women in 1 year, mostly in Russia and Eastern Europe. And if you can be rejected by 1,000 Russian women, you are bulletproof. Like, after that, nothing scares you. They won't even acknowledge you exist if they're not interested, right? And
they'll just look at you with disgust.
They won't even look at you. They'll walk around you like you're not there, or they'll look at you in absolute contempt or whatever, right? And, I was always polite. It was always appropriate. I just, maybe in the cafe to excuse me, I just wanted to say you look nice. I wanted to introduce myself. And because I was far from home, that that sort of made it a bit easier. And I didn't have any skills. This wasn't like any, pick up artist skills or anything. I was literally just saying hello. But I said to myself, right, I'm going to do this 1,000 times this year. And whenever I was in public, if I saw someone, I was interested, this is when I was single. And that was a skill. And it took, bear in mind, I'd already been in like 5 war zones at this point. This was way scarier. Okay. It was way more intimidating. And now it's, I don't need to do that anymore because I'm partnered up, I'm not looking, but it's like that in sales, for example, same thing. Alex Hormozy teaches this, just be rejected, get used to it. Because that's a lot of stuff you can only get used to through practice. You can't theoretically make that okay. It does, you can make some frames that feel better, like they're rejecting the offer, not the person. I don't know what kind of a day they're having. And what I found is 9 times out of 10, actually outside of places like Russia, people would just be like, oh, thank you so much. It's a really nice compliment. Actually, I'm married or I'm a lesbian, but I just want to say you're really brave. And assuming you're socially calibrated, right? You're, not just doing it in a dark alley at night or something. And I was like, wow, look at that. Actually, people are craving connection. And, that is something you can get better at. So I would say to young men, like, appropriately, respectfully, like if you get in the habit of talking to people, if you're scared to do it in your school or something, go on holiday to Latvia and spend a weekend walking around like I used to. This was like 15 years ago, but it's, you can definitely get more bulletproof to rejection through practice.
It's something you have to do. It's not something you can read about on the internet. Like I had the experience of working in the pickup world many, many years ago, almost 20 years ago now. And it was fascinating. You kind of touched on this earlier, is like the number of people that would read about rejection and read about all the ways to avoid rejection. And yet they could be like a encyclopedia about it. But if you said to them, hey dude, there's a girl over there, she's actually smiling at you, go talk to her. Mate. Yeah. And they would freeze like a statue, and you'd have to kind of tap them on the side of the face a couple of times to get them back.
What I learned
and then get them
say hello before I got anxious. So it takes about 10 seconds physiologically to get nervous because the adrenaline has to get pumping. So, and I'm quite impulsive because I made it. So I learned if I just quickly say hello, and sometimes I'd be in front of someone going, hello, I like your face, I don't know what to say. But by then I'm already in a conversation with them, So that was what I learned. But yeah, there's lots of types of fear, I remember I was with these parkour guys who were jumping between trees, really brave guys, young men. And then, we're having lunch with them on this course. And one of them liked this girl working in a cafe. I said, go ask her out, go ask her out. You said you like her. She seems nice, about your age. And he was like, there's no way I can do that. And I was like, oh, wow, you're like the bravest kid I know who's just jumped between trees 40 feet in the air, but you haven't transferred it. So we do have to transfer these embodied skills into the social domain as well.
Mm-hmm. They don't always naturally. There's the idea that I think is held is like, if I'm confident everywhere. But actually what it is I can be confident in one area like business or with my body, and lack complete confidence when it comes to kind of relational spaces.
It will transfer quicker though if you've got, say, the body skills, because then I said, look, what did you do before you do a jump on the trees? And they're like, well, I feel my feet, I take a breath. I'm like, do that now, go talk to her. And then they already had the skill set. They just needed that little nudge to transfer it.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a lot there. That was just fascinating. You have opinions that are like very down to earth and grounded. I know that's something that's really important to you through your content.
Keep it practical.
It's like
There's no point sticking feathers up your ass and pretending you're a chicken, like all the new agers, crystal shaggers, I call them. Got to keep it practical. I've got clients who want real shit they can use.
Yeah. What you can do in the real world and learn real skills like these. And what I'm really taking away from this conversation, especially from embodiment and just life and for men, is that all these skills that men are looking for, that they feel they need in their life, whether that's relational skills, whether that is physical skills, whether it's skills to make money, like these are all things they can learn. They can go into the world and learn, not just from books, but through like embodied, I like to call it embodied experience, like experience where you go and you do the thing and you feel the pain and the joy of doing it.
Yeah, the nice thing about a skill set model, like a skills model of embodiment, is not you've either got it or you aren't. It's like people say, I'm confident or I'm not. I just can't do that. A growth mindset, and then actually going, what skills do I need to learn? You know, like if you might need to break it down. Some people are less socially skilled. I'm kind of socially awkward in some ways. You know, there's some things that are naturally to me, there's certain leadership skills I have, others I really struggle with. We can learn skills. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. It's been fascinating to get to talk to you in real person. I've seen you in a few lives and videos here and there.
What was different? What was different?
Nothing.
I'm the same guy on and off camera as well, people say.
Yeah,
it's the same stuff.
It's a wonderful trait to have. So I'm sure the listeners are wondering where they can listen to more of you or come and do, because you got a huge range of programs that are really
the main thing we do is train coaches. So if you're interested in training and embodiment coaching, there's free resources so you can get a taste, and the main course that starts every February is called the Certificate of Embodiment Coaching. You can Google that or go to embodimentunlimited.com, and there's like a copy of my book for free, for example, videos of me coaching people if people are interested in that. There's a podcast, there's a YouTube channel, there's another YouTube channel for the young men with the weightlifting called Feral Philosophy. There is an Instagram, even though I'm not on it. What else? There's probably a grinder that someone set up for a laugh. I don't know. Like, it's all out there. But if you put Mark Walsh embodiment into the internet, you'll find all the things.
Well, thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure. And listeners, I'm sure there is someone, a man in your life that could really do listen to this very practical, very down-to-earth, skills-based episode to help him with his mental health, with his practical world application or whatever it may be. So please do us all a favor and send it to as many men as you can.
It's important It's important. Like, there's one video on Feral Philosophy, which is if you're thinking about killing yourself, go to the gym instead. And I would love it if even one, suicide, something that's touched my life when I was young. I thought about it a lot. I had mentors and loved ones who killed themselves and good friends. And if, send that video to a guy that you think might be down or whatever, for example, like all this episode or one of the other episodes, like it's really important that there are young guys particularly really suffering out there. And sometimes they just need a kind word. That's all they need sometimes.
Yeah, I echo that. Well, thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And listeners, we'll be back next week with another episode.